just so glad you're here today. And over the years, you have done so much to try to learn about what we believe at Catholic Charities Fort Worth that it's going to really take to move the needle on ending poverty. And so just to have the opportunity to have you see firsthand the work we do is just such an honor. So thank you so much for coming all the way this morning from Dallas to Fort Worth, Texas. So we're so glad you're here. So we thought kind of how today would work is that I would ask a few questions to get us started talking. And then I know this is an active group of Catholic Charities supporters and staff, and I know they will be more than happy to start raising their hands and asking you questions as well. So the first thing, you got to meet with some of our clients and case managers this morning. What'd you think?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Catholic Charities, the Catholic Charities model. Been working on this for a long time, been studying it for a long time. I went to Notre Dame and met with a number of economists at this place called LEO, the Laboratory for Economic Opportunity, who have just done some phenomenal work in measuring success of poverty. And they told me, this is, gosh, I'm right, about 6 years ago? About 6 years ago, they told me, you have got to meet this woman, Heather Reynolds, in Fort Worth, Texas. You've got the place where they're perfecting the Catholic charity model is in Fort Worth, Texas. So we've developed this friendship since then. So I just tell you, we had Heather come up and testify to walk us through how it works. And so this is a beautiful story that you're telling through Fred and other people's human stories. It's a beautiful story that needs to be told throughout all of our communities in the country. And what we're simply trying to do is breathe life into this and do what we can to help see more of this beautiful casework management system replicate. And I really believe this is among the keys to going after fixing poverty and addressing it at its root core to break the cycle of poverty. We have not been able to really get our hands around breaking the cycle of poverty in this country, and we've got to think about how to do that. And you are showing us exactly how that can work. And so I just wanted to come and see it with my own two eyes. I've heard so much about you. So thank you very much for having me here today, and that's basically why I'm here.
Great. Well, one of the things that we loved at Catholic Charities that you did when you first, I think when you were over House Budget Committee, you were trying to kind of understand poverty, you were trying to understand where the federal government was investing in poverty. And you had your staff produce a little chart, and I brought it today because we have blown up this chart at Catholic Charities and framed it. Because it just frustrates us so much to look at. If you're someone in poverty, you know, all you have to do to try to get some sort of assistance. And so you were one of the first people to actually lay this out and to look at this. Tell us, you know, what your ahas were.
It took us a year and a half to do that.
I know, it's so irritating.
No, it really did. It took us a year and a half. So, I was a couple of jobs ago chairman of the House Budget Committee, which oversees the whole, federal budget. And I said, well, where's the list of all the federal poverty programs? And where's the list of, how the measurement of success? No such thing existed, nothing. So we spent a year and a half digging through line item of the federal budget, finding out what are all the things the federal government does to try and fight poverty. And then we wanted to see if it was being successful or not, because we were coming on the 30th anniversary of the war on poverty.
Right.
So that's why we did that. We had 30 years of the war on poverty. We wanted to see where are we? I wanted to come up with a report for 30 years down the road in the war on poverty, LBJ, and where are we now? It took us a year and a half just to figure out what all the federal government does, and then there was no measurement of success. The entire war on poverty, I'm rounding here, press, I always fact check you all the time on these little things. The success is measured based on input by effort.
That's right.
How many programs are you creating? How many people are on the programs? How many dollars are you spending? And therefore, that's how we measure success versus outcomes. Are we actually truly getting people effectively out of poverty or not? And so we put together this report. We actually got assailed by a lot for how dare you, do such a thing. And what we learned is we have 80 different programs from the federal government spending almost $1 trillion a year to fight poverty, and we're not even measuring whether it's working or not. So there are a couple of programs, that do, MCV's one of them, there's some others. So what we then went into is figuring out, well, how do we change the paradigm so that the federal government is not frustrating, displacing, creating barriers and harming efforts to fight poverty, but how can we make sure that all these taxpayer dollars that are going to a good cause are done more effectively, and how do they work in partnership with philanthropy, with the private sector, so that we can all basically harness and harmonize our efforts to an outcome-based approach. And what we learned was really the case management system is the best possible system because it's individual, it's focused, it's customized. It's every single human being has a slightly different problem than the other. And so the cookie cutter, one size fits all, Washington knows best approach just doesn't work.
We agree.
So we're fighting it up, at the 50,000 foot view, and you're doing it from the bottom up, and we're trying to find out how we meet in the middle, and that's what this is all about.
That's great. That's great, and I'm glad you're on that. So help us. So I think we would both agree that reform in our country needs to happen when it comes to poverty work, welfare work, how we're investing our dollars. If you tomorrow could not have to garner votes and get the Senate
that's
to
the problem.
agree, I know.
If it weren't for the pesky democracy thing, right.
What if you could just rule the world for the day? What 3 things would you change tomorrow that you think would have the most?
I would consolidate most of our poverty programs because they're in so discrete different stovepipes. All these different rules and regulations that are so impersonal, so bureaucratic, so confusing. I would consolidate almost all of them. Get them back to local units of government. Get them back to local charities. I would break up the poverty monopoly. My friend Bob Woodson calls it the poverty industrial complex. I would basically break up the poverty monopoly and allow plenty of different groups to offer these services. So I would take all the poverty money we're spending at the federal government, send it back to our local units of government with a couple of strings. One, we're going to measure very clearly, just like Leo does you, measure for outcomes, transparent books. We're going to have metrics to measure success. And then we're going to let different entities through a casework management system manage these welfare benefits. So it won't just be the county welfare agency managing welfare. It will be Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services, the Salvation Army, America Works, whoever will be in charge of this county, this census tract, this group of people, competing based on outcomes on how to get people fully and effectively out of poverty. So I would send those dollars back. I'm not saying cut spending. This actually will save money. Get those dollars back to the local units, break up the monopoly, and then have a competition based on success, based on results for how to better fight and treat the poor. That, to me, in combination with better economic growth plans. That's something we've actually made some pretty good progress on.
Of course.
There's a lot of regulations that I would cut that just basically create barriers from the philanthropy sector, the private sector, and the charity sector working with government. I get rid of those barriers. And then the third thing, so consolidate, get back, measure, cut the regulations that make it really hard for groups. And then on the economic policy front, that's where we've made some pretty good progress. There's 2 things that I've fought for to get in this new tax law: social impact bonds and empowerment zones. Those are now in law, and they're here. So each state can designate 25% of its poor census tracts for the new empower. I used to work for Jack Kemp, and when I was Jack Kemp's staff economics guy, I worked on something we called enterprise zones back in those days. This is that idea now finally in law, 25 years later. So now every state can designate 25% of its census tracts, its poor census tracts, and then you can, and there's tax incentives for investors, for private capital to go into investing in those census tracts. And social impact bonds is a fantastic way of pulling private sector capital into a social good like casework management, some kind of poverty fighting goal, and the bond pays off if the goal is achieved. So it's all metric-based, outcome-based. It's a pay-for-performance model. So what it does is it gets private capital into fighting poverty. That's done right now. It's in law, while we're going to go work on this bureaucratic problem we've got.
That's right. Love it.
So I'm sorry, that's a lot in just a few words. But
that is great. Thank you. Okay, so your turn. I will open it up to the group for questions. What I'd love to ask you to do is, if you raise your hand, wait to be called on, and a mic will come to you, so please wait to ask your question until the mic reaches you. So, who do we have? Javier.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
You bet.
As a volunteer here at Catholic Charities, as you've spoken with Heather many times, we're really in support of the evidence-based work that we do here, making sure that what we do is actually helping the people that are suffering. So I know you introduced legislation to support and advocate for evidence-based legislation.
Yeah.
So what can you do to help your, I guess, colleagues across the aisle? I know you had Senator Murray join you in
Yep.
that legislation as well. What can we
Yeah.
do, or what can you do to make sure that evidence-based
Gets done.
programs get
Yeah, I'm really close to getting that done into law. Very, very close. So we're just negotiating to find. So back up. Patty Murray and I. She's a Democrat from Washington State. We're friends. She and I. We got the idea from Leo, from the guys at Notre Dame, and Raj Chetty, this demographer who's a Harvard guy. It was the thing I was saying, which is we learned that we spend all this money, but we don't measure whether it's working or not. And so in this 21st century, data century we're in, clearly we ought to be able to measure the outcomes of these programs. But how you do that really matters. And you want to make sure you do it in a very academically rigorous way. Oh, and you got to protect people's privacy. Mm-hmm. So when you're taking a look at government data and government spending programs, you want to make sure that you're not violating a person's privacy rights, but that we can measure the outcome of programs and let academic researchers look at programs so government shouldn't be some secret sauce. It should be an open system where we're all focusing on making sure that the goal is being accomplished. So Patty and I passed a law creating a commission of economists, privacy experts to come up with how should we do this? How should we literally retool the federal government's poverty fighting system from an input-based, effort-based system to an outcome-based, measurable system? That has now produced its results. We have a bill to implement those results, and we're this close. I almost got it done a couple of weeks ago, but we ran into a couple of hiccups. So we're getting very, very close to getting that done into law. It's past where I am in the House, but we're working through the Senate. The Senate's a real slow place, I tell you. That's a frustrating thing sometimes. So
well, as that continues to
I feel very confident we're going to get this done this year.
Yeah, we're very excited to throw you evidence-based practices that are working, that can be implemented across the country as well. I know Brentley has a question. Brentley, would you mind standing?
Good morning. So I know something you've talked about is the issue of the benefits cliff, and I encounter that daily with my clients.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, how do you propose that we fix this?
It's a really good question. So I think there are different ways of going. The benefits cliff, I don't know if everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, please do.
So what happens is you put welfare, let's just say it loosely, welfare benefits, and a person gets I always speak in charts as if I'm looking at charts in my mind, so that's what these hand gestures mean. So let me say it this way. The highest tax rate in America is not 37%, which is now in the federal tax code the highest technical tax rate. The highest tax rate in America is a single mom with 2 kids receiving $24,000 in benefits who will lose 80 cents on the dollar if she goes and takes a job. So it's telling her, don't do it. So we have these benefits, as well-intended as they are, designed with the cutoffs in such a way that it pays not to work, it pays not to take a risk. It tells you, stay where you are. So we have the federal government's poverty fighting approach has basically been described as this. You're stuck in your current station in life. The government's here to help you cope with it and stay where you are. That is not what this country is. That is not what the American idea is all about, which is the condition of your birth does not determine the outcome of your life. So we have to change that approach. And so the way we're trying to focus on the poverty cliff is carrots and sticks. Carrots, I'm a big fan of the EITC. We reformed the Earned Income Credit. It used to be called the Earned Income Tax Credit. We've reformed it in the last tax law. I want to reform it some more. I think it should go to childless adults. That's a part of the I hate speaking so academically, but it's a part of the cohort we're having a problem with labor force participation rates. Okay, what does that mean? You got a lot of people who are single, who don't have kids, who aren't working, who are able-bodied, who aren't even looking for a job or aren't in school. So we got to get them into the workforce. And the EITC helps pull them into the workforce by making work pay. And then we've got to change the way these benefits are designed so that these benefits, with the ultimate goal is it always makes sense to take a step further. It always makes work pay. You take that step to go get a part-time job, you take that step to go to get skills, you take that step to get a job, it's going to pay. And in many cases, the benefits have to be temporary. They can't last forever. You have to have either a work requirement or a time limit. What typically I find works, just the data shows us this, is work requirements work. Just working works. And working with a skill component, education component in many cases works as well. And the last point is, this is where case management really makes a huge difference. Everybody's different. People have different problems, different issues, different barriers, different family situations. So it's impossible to sit in some capital, whether it's Austin or Washington, and design a program that's going to fit to everybody's situation. That is why you need to have customization at the personal level. And those case managers have to have the tools to make sure that the incentives are all lined up perfectly so you're not running into a benefit cliff. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, we find that such a hard thing, Brentley. I think you would agree with the clients we're working with, because when we get them a job, oftentimes
they just make rational decisions, like what doesn't make sense. Yeah,
right,
they make perfectly rational
yeah,
decisions.
Right,
Yeah.
and that's one of the reasons we've set our goal of out of poverty really needs to be a living wage for this area, not for how the federal government defines poverty, so we can get people to a place where it
makes sense.
Ultimately. You got it.
And by the way, the economy, I mean, here's the good problem we have. Boomers are retiring, and there are fewer people following them in the workforce. What that means is our unemployment rate in Wisconsin is 2.9%. Right. I mean, our unemployment rate's going down. The economy is recovering. The economy is doing much better. I would argue it's a lot of good fiscal policy, but the economy is going. What that means is wages are going up, careers are being offered. There are phenomenal careers that provide living wages with just the right kind of skills that don't require 4-year degrees.
No.
And so 2 years, 2-year school is cool. We're trying to. That's our new mantra. You know, it really is. It's our new mantra. That's Kay and I are going to be working on this spring. So it's the perfect time to do this. It's a perfect time because we need the poor. We need people. We need the men and women in this country who can work and who are not working. We need them because we need their talents in the economy. We need them to share their talents with us, the rest of the economy, so the economy grows. And there's no reason why they should not be able to get themselves in a life of opportunity and upward mobility. And so it's a perfect time in the economy and society to do this, because there was ever a time where the people who are marginalized are more needed by the rest of the society. This is it.
Good. Brian, I see you have a question.
Good morning again.
Hey, Brian.
We have seen the stigmatizing of the poor at times become a barrier for the work we do and for the clients that we serve. I've heard you speak about those stigmatizations.
Yeah.
How do you think we can change that conversation?
It's a really good question. I just from looking at this issue, as full disclosure, I'm a Catholic, so so yeah. so like, can you do one of these for me? All right, thanks. Bless me. So, part of what we call the social magisterium or Catholic social, the press, I've tried not to do the thing on the sleeve because I'm a public official, but we have these beliefs that are universal, that aren't just uniquely Catholic, that believe in the dignity of every human person, that believe in specifically helping the poor, and doing it at a local, community, personal, individual level. We call this subsidiarity. It's a beautiful concept that's kind of hard to describe. And when you translate it into public policy, federalism is probably the closest kissing cousin concept. And what that means is every single one of us has an obligation to care, to get involved, and to do something about it. And when you take a look at that chart, 32 years ago, 80 programs, about $1 trillion a year, trillions spent. It gave society this sort of impression that the problem with poverty in America, the government's going to solve that. You don't really have to do anything about it. Don't worry about it. You pay your taxes, do your thing, and then those tax dollars will be used to fix this problem. And it ended up just sort of marginalizing the poor. It ended up isolating and marginalizing people from the poor because people were sort of believed that this was a government problem. It's an everybody problem. That's what Catholic Charities, among many other things in civil society, has done. So as a conservative, we call ourselves civil society conservatives. We believe in that space between ourselves and the government, which is where we live our lives. That's a beautiful thing because it's where we interact with each other, and we have an obligation to one another to make sure that we try and help each other. And that is a concept that has to be restored. And that's why we say when we're trying to get this thing called government fixed, it is to stop it from trying to dominate. It is to stop the government from trying to take over this entire space and manage the supply lines, but not the front lines of fighting poverty. The front lines of fighting poverty ought to be Catholic Charities or Social Salvation Army, local groups that are doing a good job at a human, personal level, and the government should provide resources. But the government shouldn't dictate and micromanage at the nth degree, because what that's doing is telling everybody else in society, don't worry about it, that's a government thing, you don't have to get involved. And that's basically what we're trying to, that's the new lesson we're trying to take out of this 30-year experiment.
Great. We have time for one more question. Fred?
Hey, Fred.
Hello, how you doing? Me personally, I've been impacted through Catholic Charities, and I was just wondering, how are you gonna utilize what they do in your next steps?
Yeah, actually, already have been doing it. So we had Heather come up and testify, and we've been following up by talking to the folks at Leo and the rest. So the bill that we were just talking about here, that was inspired by this. That literally was inspired by this. The designs we're trying to change to some of our welfare programs, like say food stamps, that is inspired by this. So the laws we're trying to pass are designed to break down the stovepipes, break down the barriers, and go after this poverty trap problem, this poverty cliff, benefit cliff problem. So we are looking at what's working in the field, what's working in communities, and we're trying to translate those lessons to public policy. And while we're doing that, which the slowest change is at the federal government level, right? So what we've done in the meantime with these tax laws I just described is put new systems and incentives in place for private capital to come in and start fighting poverty. Having the empowerment zone, I've been working on that since I was 22 years old. That's in law now. We now have empowerment zones in law. So for the people who are involved in business, who know tax laws, it's like kind exchanges, 1031s we call them. If you want to go sell an asset, you will not pay capital gains on that asset if you take the proceeds of that and invest it in one of these empowerment zones, which in your state will be 25% of your lowest income census tracts. And then if you invest that in this census tract, what is it called? Stop 6? Or what?
Stop 6.
Stop
You got
6,
it.
yeah. You guys talk strange in Texas. So we just call them census tract. So if you invested in Stop 6, so you can sell a stock or a bond or a business, put the money in Stock 6, not pay taxes. You keep it in that investment in Stop 6 for 10 years, you don't pay capital gains taxes on it after you sell that investment. So what we're trying to do is get capital into these poor areas. It's something that Jack Kemp taught me about way back in the day. It's now the law of the land. And then with social impact bonds, we want to be able to put incentives to finance creative ideas at the local level and get private donations to go finance these ideas. And those bonds will pay off and pay out if the metric and the benchmark has been achieved. So it's pay for performance. So in the meantime, we're doing everything we can to get private capital in this area. Again, stop displacing private and local charity with government. Get it going while we go work on the tougher nut to crack, which is, federal benefit designs that are well-intended but not working the right way. And that's basically what we're doing.
Well, thank you so much for that. And, I just want to mention that who's in the audience today is staff of Catholic Charities as well as supporters of Catholic Charities. And these folks really are the folks who have allowed us to do what we do that you can utilize in your work. And so a big thank you to everyone who's in the room today who's such a avid champion and supporter of Catholic Charities. We're so glad you were here to join us. As a little gift, we see you have cowboy boots, so we didn't need to cover you there. So good job on that.
I come in Texas.
We know you like to read, and we know you have tons of extra time on your hands. Right. And so these are 3 of our poverty books that we love that really have taught us a lot about.
I've read one of them already. But,
Hillbilly Elegy?
Yeah.
Okay. So great book, so for you to enjoy. And so,
perfect.
Speaker Ryan, we are so honored to have had you here today. Remember, we are always just a phone call away, a flight to D.C. away, anytime you need us to talk to any of your D.C. buddies. And we just thank you for your willingness to disrupt the status quo and to really put front and center the American dream, because that's what we're about at Catholic Charities. So please join me in thanking you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Hey.
Yeah.
Thank you.